The sting of his hand was not what woke me. It was the smell. The sharp, sterile reek of disinfectant that had haunted my final desperate days was gone, replaced by the cloying scent of white lilies and expensive polish. My eyes snapped open, not to the water-stained, padded ceiling of the asylum, but to the cold, glittering cascade of a crystal chandelier. I knew this place. It was my gilded cage. The marital home I had shared with Alistair Vance. Arya. Sign it. His voice, colder than the marble floor, struck me with the force of a physical blow. I turned my head, my body stiff, and saw him. The man I had loved, hated, and feared for a decade. Alistair stood before the massive floor-to-ceiling window, silhouetted by the afternoon sun. His black suit was impeccably tailored, his features carved with a brutal, godlike beauty. But his eyes, the color of a winter storm, held only naked disgust and a profound impatience. He was holding a document. The divorce agreement. A tremor that had nothing to do with fear ran through me. This wasn't the moment before my death. I had died strapped to a bed, my veins burning with sedatives, my heart giving out under the weight of a broken spirit. Just before the end, I'd heard the nurses whispering, their voices laced with pity and gossip. Alistair had finally married his beloved Isabella Swan in the wedding of the century, while I, his malicious, unstable ex-wife, had become the city's most pathetic cautionary tale. So this was it. I had been reborn. I was back 3 years ago on the very day Alistair Vance was discarding me. On this day in my past life I had shattered. I had screamed, wept, and clawed at his legs, tearing the papers to shreds. I had debased myself, begging him not to abandon me, only to be met with a deeper, more glacial contempt. "You are utterly pathetic," he had said before his bodyguards dragged me from this villa like yesterday's trash. From that day my life had spiraled into a hell of my own making. I had committed countless foolish, vengeful acts against Isabella, each one expertly deflected by Alistair, making me appear more vicious and unhinged. Finally he had lost all patience. Declaring me mentally unfit, he had personally signed the papers that sent me to that living hell, that asylum where I would meet my miserable end. An ocean of regret and agony threatened to drown me. For a man who never loved me, I had turned my own life into a tragedy, a vicious supporting role in his and Isabella's love story. How laughable. "Arya, what new game are you playing now?" Alistair's brows knitted tighter as my silence stretched. "My patience is not infinite." Slowly, deliberately I sat up straight on the plush sofa. My gaze shifted from his cold, chiseled face to the document in his hand. My heart was pounding wildly in my chest, not from grief, but from an indescribable near-death ecstasy. Heaven or fate or some cosmic justice had granted me another chance. This time I would not be a fool. But devotion? To hell with it all. I wanted only revenge. I would return every humiliation, every ounce of pain I had endured, to Alistair Vance and Isabella Swan 100-fold. The thought wasn't a quiet plot. It was a roaring inferno in my mind. I didn't just want to outsmart them. I wanted raw, brutal, crushing power. I took a deep breath, forced the storm of emotions down into a cold, hard knot in my stomach, and twisted my lips into a smile that felt uglier than tears. My voice, when it came, was hoarse but clear. "Fine." Alistair clearly hadn't expected acquiescence. Surprise flickered in his stormy eyes for a single instant before being replaced by renewed coldness. He must have thought this was another one of my manipulative ploys. He tossed the papers and a sleek, black pen onto the glass coffee table. The sound was a crisp, final snap, as if urging a piece of trash to be swept away. I didn't look at him. My hand trembled as I reached for the agreement. In my last life I hadn't even read it. I had torn it to pieces. This time I read it word by word. The contract was simple and brutally efficient. Alistair Vance, true to his status as a top-tier magnate, had calculated everything to the last cent. I was listed as the at-fault party, though the nature of my fault was never specified, and was to leave with nothing but the clothes on my back. In his mercy, he was granting me a shabby ancestral house from some old family friend and a severance of $1 million. $1 million. It was an insult next to his billions, pocket change he wouldn't bother to pick up from the gutter. But then as I reached the end, my eyes caught a line of fine print in the supplementary clauses. As further consideration, a 3% equity stake in Ethel Productions, a subsidiary under the Vance Global Group, shall be transferred to the party of the second part, Aria Moore. I froze. In my last life, in my frantic hysterical state, I had never seen that clause. Ethel Productions was the dullest, most lifeless of Vance Global's assets. It was a perennial loss-maker, a half-dead subsidiary Alistair had been trying to offload for years. To him, that 3% was probably as worthless as the $1 million. Scraps to toss to a beggar to ensure she left quietly. Only someone like me, reborn with the knowledge of the future, knew the truth. In 6 months, Ethel Productions would skyrocket in value because of a breakout web drama, Skyward Bound. Its stock would multiply by hundreds, and the drama's rights would be snapped up by a mysterious, far-sighted investor. That opportunity was now sitting in front of me. An avenging blade handed to me by fate itself. I picked up the pen. My hand shook not from fear but from a terrifying, focused excitement. I signed my name at the bottom of the agreement. Aria. The handwriting was a little crooked. I pushed the contract back across the glass surface toward him and for the first time since this new life began, looked at him with calm, clear eyes. Pleasure doing business, Alistair, I said, my voice steady. I hope we never see each other again. He studied me with a look of curiosity and appraisal, as if meeting me for the first time. He had never seen me so composed, so rational. In every script of my past life, I had been the hysterical, useless fool who existed for no reason but to love him. Good, he said, his voice flat. He folded the agreement, turned away with a finality that was utterly cold and said, "You have 3 days to move out." Then he strode from the room without a backward glance. The front door clicked shut, a sound as final as a divider between two worlds. I collapsed back onto the sofa, gasping, and finally let the tears fall. They were not tears of sorrow but of rebirth. Alistair Vance. Isabella Swan. The game is only just beginning. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying over the screen with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I called the one person who, in my last life, had tried to help me after I'd lost everything. My cousin Leo. He was a brilliant financial operator, sharp and cunning, but perpetually unlucky, never quite catching his break. Leo? It's Aria, I said when he answered, his voice groggy with sleep or stress. I need your help. Right now. I have some money and a chip that's about to be worth a fortune. My voice was calm, resolute, filled with an authority that brooked no doubt. The first step of my revenge was to turn the trash Alistair had thrown at me into the sharpest blade, aimed directly at his heart. 3 days later, I stood on the villa's doorstep, a single suitcase holding the remnants of my old life beside me. Alistair's butler, Mr. Sterling, looked at me with a mixture of pity and professional distance. "Miss Moore, the car is ready." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I nodded politely. In these 3 years of misery, he had been one of the few in this house who hadn't treated me with open contempt. He had, on occasion, secretly brought me a warm meal when Alistair had locked me out of the dining room. I kept that kindness in my heart. I didn't get into the sleek, black luxury car his family had sent. Instead, I hailed a rideshare and gave the driver an address in the heart of the financial district. My entire world was now contained in one suitcase of clothes, a bank card holding the insulting $1 million, and the freshly executed proof of the equity transfer for Ethel Productions. In a quiet, unassuming cafe I met Leo. He looked haggard with heavy dark circles under his eyes. His suit was slightly rumpled. Life was clearly still kicking him while he was down. "Aria?" I heard. "You and Alistair Vance are really divorced?" he asked, sliding into the booth opposite me. "We are," I said, getting straight to the point. I pushed the equity transfer document toward him. "Cousin, this is my entire stake. And it's your chance." Leo picked up the paper. When his eyes scanned over the 3% stake in Ethel Productions, his brow furrowed in concern. "Aria, don't be naive. This is Alistair humiliating you. Ethel is a bottomless pit. This stake is worthless, maybe even a liability." "Not now," I said, locking my eyes with his, speaking slowly and deliberately. "I need you to use that 1 million plus every contact and bit of capital you can mobilize to lever us up. We're going to short Nexus Dynamics, a Vance Global affiliate." Leo's face went pale. "Are you insane? Short Nexus Dynamics? That's their flagship AI project this year. The stock is on a tear. Our money would be a drop in the ocean. It would be swallowed in seconds." 3 days from now, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper but carrying an unnerving certainty. Nexus Dynamics will be hit by a scandal. Their core technology will be exposed as plagiarized. The founder will be forced to resign, and the stock will hit 3 consecutive limit-down days. I'd seen it splashed across the financial news in my last life. Back then, I'd been too wrapped up in my obsession with Alistair to care about business news. Now that forgotten headline was my most powerful weapon. Leo stared at me, his eyes searching my face for any hint of a joke or madness. But all he found was cold, hard resolve. How? He asked, his voice hoarse. How could you possibly know that? You don't need to know how I know, I cut in sharply. This is our only chance. If it works, we get the seed money for everything that comes next. If it fails, I shrugged, a gesture of chilling finality. I'm back where I started. I have nothing left to lose. My words hit him like a physical blow. He looked at me, the cousin who used to be naive and foolish, chasing after a man who despised her. And in what felt like an instant, I had been reborn into someone else, someone terrifying and focused. After a long, tense silence, he suddenly slammed his palms softly on the table. Fine. I've always hated those Wall Street pricks who look down on us anyway. If we lose, worst case, I'll beg under a bridge with you. A genuine smile, the first in what felt like an eternity, touched my lips. I had chosen the right ally. The next 3 days were the most nerve-wracking of my life. Leo proved himself a born trader. He used my 1 million as margin and, through a complex web of operations and shadowy channels, built a massive short position worth $50 million. It was like walking a tightrope over a cliff. Any tremor in the market and we would be utterly annihilated. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, with 1 hour left before the market closed, our account was bleeding into the danger zone. Nexus Dynamics price kept inching up, pushing us to the brink of a margin call, a forced liquidation that would wipe us out. Leo's shirt was soaked with sweat, his eyes bloodshot as he stared at the flickering screen. "Half an hour left," he whispered, his voice trembling. "If there's no news in that time, we're finished." My fingers were clenched so tightly around my coffee cup my knuckles were white, but my face remained a mask of calm. I was betting everything that my memory had not failed me, that the path of fate had not veered. At 2:45 p.m., a bold red news alert detonated across every financial terminal in the world. Breaking. Trillion-dollar leader Nexus Dynamics core algorithm accused of plagiarizing Silicon Valley startup. Evidence is conclusive. The moment the news broke, Nexus Dynamics stock plunged like a rock. It fell vertically, a straight, terrifying line down. It fell, Leo breathed, his voice a mixture of awe and terror. It really fell. He nearly jumped out of his seat as the green line on the screen cascaded downward like a magnificent money-making waterfall. Our account balance flipped from a bloody red into a vibrant, healthy green, and then rocketed upward at a furious, almost obscene pace. By the last minute before the close, the stock was nailed to the daily limit down. We had won. Leo collapsed back into his chair, speechless for a long moment, just staring at the screen. I leaned forward, my own heart thundering, and looked at the long string of numbers in our account. 50 million in principal, amplified by the brutal power of leverage and the crash, had yielded us a net profit of nearly $200 million. This was my real divorce settlement. Alistair Vance had shrugged me off with $1 million and a pile of worthless paper, and I had used his mercy to tear the first piece of flesh from his empire. The thrill of it was more intoxicating than any false intimacy I'd ever experienced in my last life. "Arya," Leo finally stammered, looking at me as if I were an apparition. What are you?" "Cousin," I said, standing and placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "This is only the beginning. Now that we have money, the next step is to acquire Ethel." "Completely." "But you already have 3%, he protested. "It's not enough," I said, my voice cold. "I want 100% control. I want this blade entirely in my own hand." At that moment, Alistair was probably in a panic, tearing his hair out over the Nexus Dynamics scandal. He would never imagine that the trash he had discarded had quietly transformed into a starving wolf, now holding $200 million in cash and eyeing the weakest link in his commercial empire. He would not suspect that this was only the start. I didn't want merely to slap his face or make him regret his actions. I wanted a total, violent economic crushing. I wanted to watch the empire he had built collapse, piece by piece under my hands, until he had nothing left but the dust of his own pride. With $200 million burning a hole in our clandestine account, the acquisition of Ethel Productions was almost laughably simple. The subsidiary was a ghost ship, adrift in the vast Vance global fleet, its decks empty and its hull rotting. Years of losses had made its shareholders desperate to unload their junk bonds. I instructed Leo to anonymously issue a cash takeover offer at a price 20% above the dismal market rate. It was a siren's call they couldn't resist. Small shareholders, seeing this unexpected premium, scrambled to sell their worthless shares as if they'd found a savior. The only potential obstacle was Alistair himself. As the absolute controller of Vance Global, any major change in a subsidiary's equity required his signature. I had Leo deliberately submit the acquisition proposal on the same day the Nexus Tech scandal reached its fever pitch. As I'd predicted, the overwhelmed Emperor, fighting fires on a dozen fronts, only glanced at the proposal. Seeing that a premium buyout might recover some minor losses for the group, he signed off with a single dismissive stroke of his pen. He didn't even bother to investigate the anonymous buyer. To him, it was just another piece of administrative trash to be dealt with while handling real crises. A week later, Leo placed a brand new document in front of me. I was now the sole 100% owner of Ethel Productions. I immediately filed the paperwork to rename it Phoenix Rising Entertainment. The following day, I stood in the company's tired, dated CO office. The air was thick with the smell of dust and defeat. Employees shuffled through the halls, their eyes listless and dead, their postures slumped in resignation. But I saw past the decay. I knew this would be the bedrock of my empire. My first act was to call an all-hands meeting. When I entered the conference room dressed in a sharp black business suit and heels, a wave of stunned silence washed over the room. A few recognized me as Alistair Vance's infamous, discarded wife. Is that Aria Moore? She bought the company? This has to be a joke. The company was already toast. Now some clueless socialite is running it? We should all be updating our resumes. The mutters of derision and contemptuous laughter were like physical blows, but they bounced off the armor of my resolve. Expressionless, I walked to the head of the table and slammed a thick folder down on the polished wood. From today on, my voice cut through the chatter, silencing it instantly. My name is Aria Moore and I am the CEO of Phoenix Rising Entertainment. I let my gaze, cold and sharp, sweep across every face in the room. I know what you're thinking. That I'm just a trophy wife who rode a man's coattails, an ignorant outsider who knows nothing about this business. I paused, letting the accuracy of my words sink in. So I'll give you a chance. And I'll give myself a chance. I tapped the folder. This contains a list of the company's current projects and each of your personnel files. Now you may speak freely. Tell me, why has this company become what it is today? The room fell silent again, this time heavy with uncertainty. Finally, a middle-aged man with sharp, intelligent eyes behind black-rimmed glasses stood. His name was Charles Reed, the company's project director, a man whose talent had been withering on the vine here. Miss Moore, forgive my bluntness, he said, his voice weary. The company's biggest problem is it has no money, no resources, and no good projects. The scripts we hold are the leftovers others have refused, second or third tier dreck. The actors we can afford are nobodies who can't carry a scene. Even the yearly allocations from Vance Global barely keep the lights on and the servers running. His words voiced the collective despair. I nodded. So, the second thing I will do is fix those problems. I gave a slight signal to Leo, who was standing by the door. He projected a PowerPoint I had meticulously prepared onto the large screen at the end of the room. I will inject $500 million of capital into this company, I announced. The conference room erupted. 500 million was an astronomical, insane sum for this dying firm. All eyes were on me, wide with disbelief. They couldn't fathom that the woman Alistair Vance had publicly discarded could produce $500 million in cash. This 500 million, I continued, raising my voice over the din, will be spent on 3 areas. I held up a finger. First, we will immediately greenlight an S-level film and television project. I've already chosen the script, Skyward Bound. Director Reed, you will have full creative authority. The budget is unlimited. I pushed a printed treatment across the table to Charles. His hand trembled as he took it. After reading just the first page, his eyes, which had been dead for so long, lit up with a fire I remembered from my past life. This was the project that would make him famous. I held up a second finger. Second, we will form a new talent and economics division, to be led by top agent Miss Diana Croft. A fresh wave of murmurs rolled through the room. Diana Croft was a legendary agent, the maker of 3 Best Actor winners, though she'd been recently shelved for offending a powerful studio head. I will hand you a list of names, I continued. Spare no expense to sign them, no matter which company currently holds their contracts. All breach penalties will be covered by me. The names on my list were actors and crew who, in my last life, were on the cusp of megastardom but were currently languishing in obscurity or bad deals. I held up a third finger. Third, effective immediately, all employee salaries will be doubled. Project bonuses will be calculated separately and paid upon successful completion. If the first 2 announcements were pie-in-the-sky promises, the third was pure, unadulterated rocket fuel. The room shifted from stunned silence to a boiling, electric excitement. Eyes that had been full of contempt now burned with eagerness and hunger. I had understood the simplest, most violent truth. For people who had struggled at the bottom for so long, real money beats empty promises every time. In the shortest time possible, I had bought their loyalty, or at the very least their ferocious commitment. Just as the meeting adjourned and the energized employees began to file out, my personal phone vibrated. The screen lit up with a name I knew all too well, Alistair Vance. I looked at the familiar name, a mocking smile curling my lips as I answered. Arya, is that you? His voice was tight, laced with suppressed anger and a thread of disbelief. You bought Ethel? The vice president keeps good tabs, I laughed lightly, casual, as if discussing the weather. From now on you should call me President Moore. Oh, and one more thing. I renamed it. Phoenix Rising Entertainment. Dead silence on the other end. I could almost picture his face, that perfectly composed mask darkening enough to drip water. He'd never expected the garbage he tossed aside to so quickly take on a shape he couldn't comprehend. He couldn't imagine where I'd gotten so much money. Where did your money come from? He finally asked, his voice cold as glacial ice. That's not for the vice president to worry about, I replied sweetly. Perhaps I should thank you. The $1 million divorce settlement was quite handy. I said it purely to needle him. Arya, what on earth are you trying to do? What I was born to do, I replied coolly. Vice President, have you forgotten we're divorced? What I do is none of your business. I'm just running my company, handling my business. You better not try any tricks or... I cut him off, my voice instantly dropping to a sub-zero temperature. Alistair Vance, put away that CO act. You're in no position to threaten me anymore. Take care of your Nexus Tech. Take care of your darling Isabella. Stop bothering me. With that, I hung up on him. The sound of the busy tone in my ear filled me with a surge of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. Alistair, this is only the beginning. You're feeling anger. You're feeling out of control. Good. Next, I'll make you taste even more helplessness, despair, and pain. The second step of my crushing counterattack was to build an empire in the field he knew best, in the way he most despised, one he could never hope to match. Phoenix Rising's reforms burned through the industry like a wildfire. The $500 million cash injection was a shot of pure adrenaline that jolted the entire company back to vibrant, aggressive life. Charles Reed took the script for Skyward Bound and led a dedicated team on a nationwide search for the perfect, albeit still unknown, director and cast. Diana Croft, armed with my list and a seemingly bottomless budget, successfully poached several potential stars who would one day become household names. And I, Arya Moore, became the biggest mystery in the city's high society. The whispers were a constant hum. Who is my new patron? Which shadowy tycoon was funding the discarded wife's insane spending spree? Alistair sent his best people to investigate, but Leo, with his financial genius, had covered every track. All the money trails led back to a complex web of fictitious overseas investors and shell corporations. It was clean, flawless, with no cracks to be found. The more Alistair failed to discover the source of my power, the more restless and visibly agitated he became. That restlessness reached its peak a month later at the annual Children's Hope Charity Gala. The event was a sea of glittering jewels and designer gowns, drawing every notable figure in the city. And of course Alistair was there, a dark, brooding presence. On his arm was his cherished Isabella Swan. She wore a gown of ethereal white, her makeup delicate and understated, looking as pure and innocent as a lily untouched by the dust of the world. She clung to his arm, receiving the crowd's blessings and admiration. They were the picture of a perfect couple, a match made in heaven. In my last life, this was the night I had completely lost control. I'd stormed up to them and doused Isabella's white gown with red wine, screaming that she was a shameless mistress. Alistair had slapped me across the face in front of everyone, and I had become a city-wide laughingstock, the crazy, pathetic ex-wife. This time when I entered the ballroom, invitation in hand, the dynamic shifted. I wore a sleek, backless gown of deep scarlet that made me look radiant and untouchable. My face carried a poised, distant smile, a world apart from the disheveled, humiliated woman of a month ago. Alistair's eyes locked onto me immediately. His expression was a complex fog of shock, sharp curiosity, and a flicker of something that might have been admiration, an emotion he probably didn't even recognize. Beside him, Isabella's face went a shade paler. She quickly recovered, resuming her pitifully delicate look and leaning softly against Alistair. "Alistair," she murmured, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Arya seems so different now." Her voice was a masterpiece of innocent worry, expertly crafted to make me seem like the lurking threat. I ignored them completely and moved straight toward a circle of the most renowned directors and producers in attendance, greeting them confidently and exchanging business cards. My conversation, my insight into market trends, and the open secret of the 500 million behind Phoenix rising quickly made me the new center of gravity in the room. Alistair was left on the sidelines, his face darkening by the minute. He was used to being the sun around which all planets orbited, used to me being a pathetic, weeping satellite. But now I didn't even grant him a glance. I had stolen his spotlight, and that loss of control was eating him alive. At last, Isabella couldn't hold back. She detached herself from Alistair, took a flute of champagne and glided toward me, her face wearing a sweet, harmless smile that made my skin crawl. "Arya, it's been so long," she said, her voice like tinkling bells. "I'm truly happy for you, seeing how well you're doing now." She raised her glass, the picture of sincere benevolence. All around us, heads turned. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the ex-wife and the true love colliding in public. I swirled the rich, blood-red wine in my glass, giving her a half-smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Then I really should thank you and Vice President Vance for kicking me out of that gilded cage. Freedom suits me." Isabella's smile froze for a microsecond before she softened her features further, looking even more delicate. "Arya, don't say that. Alistair and I both hope you're happy. Are you still blaming us?" Her eyes welled with manufactured tears, a masterclass in making herself the victim. In my last life, this would have sent me into a furious, foot-stomping rage. But this time I only smiled lightly. "Blame you? Why would I blame you?" I asked in mock surprise. "I should be thanking you. If the vice president hadn't cut his losses and kicked out an unqualified stand-in like me, how would you, the real one, ever have gotten what you wanted?" I bit down hard on the word stand-in. Isabella's face went chalk white. A muffled gasp rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew the open secret, that I bore an uncanny resemblance to Alistair's first love, Isabella's own older sister, Clara, who had died tragically young. It was whispered that he had married me only because I was a living monument to her. But no one had ever dared to say it aloud. "Till now." What nonsense are you talking?" Isabella stammered, her composure cracking. I raised an eyebrow, then leaned in so close that only she could hear my next words, whispered like a serpent's promise. "Isabella, did you really think what you did was seamless? 3 years ago when Clara had that car accident, where were you? Why didn't you pick up her last desperate call?" I felt her flinch violently against me. "Were you hoping she'd die, so you could finally take her place at Alistair's side?" Each word was a poison-tipped blade plunging straight into the black heart of her secret. She shuddered, her pupils contracting to pinpricks as she stared at me with pure, unadulterated terror, as if I were a demon she had personally buried, crawling out of hell. You, she pointed a trembling finger at me, her lips moving soundlessly. Did I hit a nerve? I stepped back, putting a polite distance between us again, my smile turning cold and mocking. "Oh, and I almost forgot to tell you. Your sister's diary. I think I happened to pick it up. Of course, the diary was a complete bluff, a gambit. But Isabella, consumed by her own guilt, didn't know that. The last thread of her composure snapped. Her mind, stuck on that one word, diary, broke. Like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, she shrieked and suddenly flung the champagne in her hand straight at my face. You lunatic. Liar. The scene was eerily familiar, only this time our roles were perfectly reversed. I had anticipated it. With a slight, graceful turn of my body, the golden liquid missed me completely and splashed all over Alistair Vance, who had just arrived to rescue his damsel in distress. The entire ballroom fell into a deathly silence. Alistair stood frozen, staring down at the dark, spreading stain on his impeccably tailored, astronomically expensive tuxedo. His face was as black as a thundercloud. Isabella, the moment she flung the drink, realized her catastrophic mistake. She looked between Alistair's stormy expression and the hostile, shocked gazes of the elite crowd, and understood in a single horrifying instant what she had done. The pure, innocent image she had spent years meticulously cultivating had been utterly destroyed by her own hand. Alistair, I didn't mean to. It's Arya. She provoked me, she stammered, panic rising as real tears of terror now poured down her face. I stood to the side, an outsider watching a farce of their own making. And in what might pass for supreme kindness, I offered her a pristine white napkin with a serene smile. Miss Swan, your emotions seem rather unstable. Maybe you should see a doctor. I know an excellent psychiatrist. Would you like me to introduce you? The words hit both Alistair and Isabella like a resounding slap across the face, because everyone in our circle knew exactly who had recently been declared mentally unstable and sent to a psychiatric hospital. It was me. Alistair's head snapped up. For the first time, those hawk-like eyes of his showed a flicker of scrutiny and deep, unsettling doubt. And it wasn't aimed at me, but at the tear-streaked, hysterical woman clinging to his arm. He wasn't an idiot. Tonight had been too abnormal. I had been composed, cultured, and strategically brilliant, while the always gentle Isabella had lost control in the most public and vulgar way imaginable. A seed of suspicion was planted deep in his mind. That was precisely the effect I wanted. I no longer looked back at the wreckage I had orchestrated. Turning away amid a sea of meaningful glances and whispered calculations, I exited the gala with the same grace with which I had entered. Alistair Vance, Isabella Swan, are you satisfied with this public slap in the face? Don't be in a hurry. This is only the appetizer. The real, brutal crushing is coming. The charity gala scandal was the talk of our circles for a week. While Alistair's PR team managed to keep it out of the major media outlets, in a world with no real secrets, the video of Isabella's hysterical outburst and my cool retort spread through private chats and closed networks like wildfire. The image of the pure lily was permanently tarnished. A palpable rift formed between Alistair and Isabella. I heard through the grapevine that he had been avoiding her, consumed by damage control for both his company and his personal reputation. I had no time to savor their discord, however. My revenge plan had entered its most critical high-stakes phase. Production on Skyward Bound began in earnest. I had gambled nearly all of Phoenix Rising's liquid assets on this single project. I hired a visionary, albeit unproven, director, engaged the best VFX team money could poach, and spared no expense on production design. To the outside world, I looked insane, a reckless dilettante burning money on a doomed vanity project. But only I knew the cultural tidal wave this drama would unleash once it aired. Meanwhile, Leo, operating from a discreet, fortified office, used our remaining war chest to quietly build an even more audacious shorting matrix against the Vance Global Group in the financial markets. This time our target was the conglomerate's core industry, real estate. I clearly remembered from my last life that in 3 months' time, the government would abruptly announce the strictest property purchase restrictions in a decade, sending the entire sector and Vance Global with it into a tailspin. Alistair, still reeling from the Nexus Tech scandal and his personal troubles, remained arrogantly oblivious. He was steeped in his commercial empire, viewing my moves in entertainment as mere women's quarrels, a trivial distraction. He had no idea that a net, woven with threads of gold and vengeance, was tightening beneath his feet. 3 months flew by in a whirlwind of production meetings, dailies, and market analysis. The day Skyward Bound premiered exclusively on a major streaming platform, the initial numbers were mediocre. A palpable panic gripped the company. Leo called me, his voice tense. "Arya, the first day metrics are flat. The industry is laughing at us." I remained calm, my heart a steady drumbeat amidst the storm. "Stick to the plan. Activate the second phase marketing. Let the show speak for itself." I had seen this in my last life. Skyward Bound was a slow burn, a show that relied on complex characters and intricate world building, not a flashy premiere. Day 2, the numbers began a slow, steady climb. Day 3, word of mouth started to ferment. Organic recommendations, fan theories, and edited clips went viral across every social media platform. By the end of the first week, Skyward Bound swept every viewership chart like an unstoppable force, becoming the undeniable phenomenon of the year. Phoenix Rising Entertainment rose from the ashes of Ethel Productions to fame overnight. The company's valuation rocketed from a few $100 million to over $5 billion, and it kept climbing. The name Arya Moore was completely shaken off the label of Alistair Vance's ex-wife. I was now the hottest new tycoon in business, a self-made, sharp-eyed legendary female CEO. And on that weekend, when Skyward Bound's popularity reached its stratospheric peak, the other boot finally dropped. The government abruptly announced the strictest property purchase restrictions in history. The moment the news broke, real estate stocks crashed across the board. The markets were a sea of red. The Vance Global Group, its backbone built on property development, was torn down violently. On the first trading day, its shares hit the limit town at the open. The second day they hit limit town again. The third day was the same inevitable, brutal plunge. In just 72 hours, Vance Global's market value evaporated by nearly $100 billion. Panic spread through the group like a virus. Banks bombarded them with margin calls, and partners fled like rats from a sinking ship. An unprecedented crisis pinned Alistair Vance, the once untouchable king of industry, on the very edge of the cliff. While our team, having shorted the stock at its peak, watched our accounts fill to overflowing. This time we not only recouped all our earlier costs, we accumulated a terrifying amount of capital, enough to confront the wounded Vance Global head-on. In our new opulent office, Leo trembled not with fear, but with a kind of reverent excitement as he stared at the dazzling string of numbers on the screen. "We did it, Arya. We actually destabilized that behemoth." I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city's financial district, my gaze as calm and flat as a mill pond. "This isn't enough," I said, my voice cold. "I want him completely down." At that moment my private phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew. I answered. On the line came a voice, both familiar and now strangely hoarse with fatigue. "Arya, where are you? Let's meet." His tone was no longer commanding. It held a hint of something I had never heard from him before. Negotiation. I smiled. "Alistair Vance, have you finally bowed that proud head of yours? Vice President so busy? How do you have time to see someone like me?" I asked, feigning innocence. There was a pause on the other end as he tried to control his emotions. "I want to buy the secondary streaming rights for Skyward Bound and the subsequent IP development rights. Name your price." My sneer deepened. Vance Global had film subsidiaries too, but they'd had a dismal year. My hit drama was the only lifeline left that could prove to the market and his panicked shareholders that the group still had earning power and cultural relevance. He wanted to buy his salvation with money. "Vice President," I said lightly, "do you think I'm short of cash now?" His restraint broke and anger, raw and desperate, crept into his voice. "What do you want? Isn't all this just revenge against me? Fine. I admit I was cruel to you before. I was wrong." He forced the words out. "Name one condition. If I can do it, I'll agree to it." His apology sounded to me like the world's most hollow joke. In my last life, when I was locked in a psychiatric ward, tortured and unable to seek life or death, where was he? He was enjoying the world's blessings with his white moonlight. Did he think one flippant, self-serving "I was wrong" could erase every wound, every moment of agony? My voice went icy, each word pulled from a cellar of absolute zero. "Do you think I did all this for your apology? Or to make you regret it?" I let the question hang in the tense silence. "No, you're wrong. I did it because I want to see you suffer. I want you to have nothing. I want to see you kneel before me like a dog, begging for mercy. I could hear his ragged breath on the other end of the line. The rights to Skyward Bound, I continued, my voice dripping with finality. I won't sell them. Not only will I not sell them, I will launch the film adaptation, the sequels, the game adaptations. I will use them to earn tens of billions in profit. And I will use that money to buy up Vance Global's shares, delivering the deadliest blow when you are at your weakest. I took a slow, deliberate breath, savoring the moment. So, Alistair Vance, put away those ridiculous conditions. What you can do now is wash your neck and wait for me to tear down everything you built, piece by piece. After I finished speaking, I hung up and immediately blacklisted the number. The sunset outside the window was a pale, bloodless orange. I knew Alistair must be standing somewhere in his crumbling empire, holding his phone and tasting the absolute despair I had just handed him. It felt better than any triumph I could have imagined. The third step of my violent crushing wasn't only to beat you in the field you excel at. It was to snuff out your final hope when you had nowhere left to turn. My declaration of war sent Alistair into a frenzy. Like a cornered beast, he threw every resource he had left into a frantic, desperate counterattack. He tried to poach the core team from Phoenix Rising, offering them double, triple their salaries. But he found them all bound to me with ironclad contracts, generous equity stakes, and something even more powerful: loyalty forged in shared success. They had been nobodies before I arrived. Now they were architects of a phenomenon. No one could be shaken loose. He tried to strike at us in the capital markets, launching a smear campaign and attempting to manipulate our stock price. But our capital, managed by Leo's brilliant, paranoid mind, flowed like mercury, defending against every attack and leaving no opening. Leo had built an indestructible financial firewall around our empire. He even resorted to unsavory, underhanded measures. He sent people to dig up dirt on my family, to follow me, to manufacture negative press about my mental state and my questionable sources of income. But all of this played directly into my plans. I had long since moved my family to a secure private location, and the so-called dirt his investigators dug up was laughably flimsy. Phoenix Rising's powerful, now well-funded PR machine easily batted away every allegation, often turning them into stories of my resilience, further cementing my public image as an independent, formidable woman who had survived repeated attacks and refused to fall. In the public eye, I was a heroine. Alistair was becoming the villain. Each of his assaults landed like a punch on cotton, dissipating without effect and only worsening his own precarious situation. His struggles began to look pathetic and pitiable even to his former allies. He had become a puppet dancing to my tune, his every frantic move within my calculation, his energy wasted on battles I had already won. The true final showdown came a month later. The continuous plunge of Vance Global's shares had triggered market value maintenance clauses in their agreements with multiple banks. They were now facing catastrophic calls for additional collateral and accelerated loan repayment. Alistair's only option was to raise $30 billion in cash within a week. Otherwise, the banks would have the right to seize and sell his equity, and the Vance Global Group would be broken up and sold for scrap. He began frantically selling assets: the private jet, the yacht, valuable art collections. He contacted every ally, every business partner who might help. But the vultures only circle when they smell weakness. Those who had once clamored for his favor now avoided his calls like the plague. That was when I made my final move. I had Leo, on behalf of our newly formed investment vehicle, Phoenix Capital, announced to the market that we were prepared to spend $30 billion to acquire Vance Global's floating shares and toxic real estate assets. The news was a bomb that shattered Alistair's last fragile hope. My move sent a clear, brutal signal to the market. Vance Global was finished, and I was the vulture king ready to pick the carcass clean. Shareholders, already in a panic, began selling en masse, desperate to get whatever they could before the company collapsed entirely. The stock went into another death spiral, a final bloody bath. The night before the final blow was to be delivered, I received an unexpected call. It wasn't from Alistair. It was from Isabella White. Her voice was no longer fragile and pitiful. It was stripped raw, full of venom and a crumbling hysteria. "Arya, you bitch. What do you think you're doing? You ruined him. You ruined everything for me. I'll ruin you. I'll tell everyone you're insane." I sneered, the sound cold and empty in my quiet office. Isn't everything you have stolen from your sister? Or did you forget about Clara so quickly? She spat her words. You liar. My sister. It was an accident. Oh really? I replied, my voice dangerously cool. That diary I mentioned, I've handed it over to the police. The truth about your sister's accident will be on the front page of every paper soon. Isabella, you should be worried not about Alistair, but about whether you'll spend the rest of your life behind bars. I was bluffing. There was no diary. But a guilty conscience is its own executioner. The silence on the other end was profound, and then it was broken by a scream of pure, undiluted terror and collapse, followed by the sound of something shattering and then a dead line. I knew she was finished. The mere suggestion of evidence was enough to unravel her completely. The next day was Alistair's final fundraising deadline. I sat in Phoenix Capital's top-floor office, the one that had once been his, watching the huge screen as Vance Global's stock, after the market opened, plummeted in a final free-fall collapse, shattering every psychological defense. At 10 a.m. my new assistant, a sharp and fiercely loyal young woman, knocked and entered. Miss Moore, Alistair Vance is here. No appointment. He says he must see you. I spun the executive chair, the one that had been his, to look at the pale, tranquil sky outside the window. The city stretched out below, a kingdom I had conquered. Let him in, I said, my voice even. A few minutes later the heavy oak door opened and Alistair walked in. He was no longer the arrogant, high and mighty business emperor. His suit was rumpled, his tie askew. His hair, usually perfectly styled, was disheveled. Deep, bruised hollows rimmed his red-veined eyes. In a matter of months he looked a decade older. He stood in front of my desk, a supplicant in the court he once ruled, staring at me with eyes full of bloodshot hatred and a regret so profound it had etched itself onto his face. Arya, he said, his voice rough like sandpaper. You've won. I said nothing. I simply watched him, my expression unreadable. Suddenly his knees buckled. The man who had once been unbearably proud, the one I had admired and loved for 10 years, now knelt on the cold, hard floor before me. I beg you. His forehead pressed to the ground, his voice breaking with a plea I had once made to him. Spare Vance Global. He was sobbing now, great heaving breaths. I will transfer every share I personally hold to you free of charge. Just give the company a way out. Give those tens of thousands of employees a way out. I looked down at his groveling form. I felt no ripple of pity, not the slightest flicker of pleasure, only a deep, resonating irony that echoed from my past life into this one. In my last life I had knelt and begged him like this. I had begged him not to abandon me. I had begged him to just look at me. How had he spoken to me then? I leaned forward slightly, my voice quiet, precise, and utterly merciless as I returned his words to him verbatim. Alistair Vance, I whispered. You are so pathetic. I stood and walked around the desk, looking down at him from my full height. Do you think I did all this for your shares? For Vance Global. I shook my head slowly. No. I did it to see you like this. To see you kneel before me like a dog. I took another step closer. As for those employees you suddenly remember? Huh. I scoffed, the sound harsh in the silent room. Why didn't you think of them when you sacrificed other subsidiaries to save Nexus Tech? Why didn't you think of them when you used group resources to crush me, just to please your beloved Isabella? My voice rose, not in volume but in intensity, each word a nail in the coffin of his legacy. Alistair, you've always been a selfish bastard. Your empire, built on the suffering of others, was doomed the moment it was erected. He lifted his head and looked at me. The last glimmer of fight, of hope in his eyes, died out. Arya. He murmured my name as if searching my face for some trace of the woman who had loved him to madness. But she was gone. She had died in a psychiatric hospital, forgotten and alone. The game was over. I picked up the phone on my desk, and dialed Leo's direct line. Begin the final step of the acquisition, I said, my voice calm and clear. In front of the broken man kneeling on the floor, I gave the order that sealed his fate and completed my conquest. He slumped to the floor, a statue stripped of its soul, of its very reason for being. The sunlight outside the window was blinding, washing over the city I now controlled. My revenge had ended with the most thorough, most violent crushing imaginable. I hadn't become a better person to make him regret. I had become a colder, stronger, more brilliant villain, and I had personally dragged him and everything he had ever built into the hell he had made for me. That was the only revenge ending I ever wanted. The restructuring of Vance Global was a surgical, merciless process. I didn't just acquire the company, I dismantled its very soul. The name Vance was scrubbed from every building, every document, every vestige of the empire. It was all absorbed into the ever-expanding map of my Phoenix empire. The business magazines called it the most brilliant, ruthless corporate takeover of the decade. I was featured on the cover of Forbes, the youngest woman to ever grace its list, hailed as a self-made legend with a chilling eye for opportunity. Alistair Vance, by contrast, vanished. He moved into the shabby ancestral flat he had tossed to me as a parting insult, a final poetic twist of the knife. Without money, power, or reputation, he was less than an ordinary man. The world that had once bowed to him now barely remembered his name. Isabella Swan's fate was even more karmic. My bluff about the diary had been a lucky strike. The police, now alerted, reopened the investigation into her sister Clara's death. A guilt-ridden former driver whom Isabella had paid off years ago, finally came forward. The truth was even more sordid than I had guessed. Isabella hadn't just ignored Clara's call. She had deliberately sabotaged the car, hoping a small accident would hospitalize her sister and make her seem unreliable to Alistair. The plan had gone horribly, tragically right. Charged with indirect intentional homicide, Isabella was sentenced to a long prison term. The pressure and the exposure of her true self shattered her mind. She was declared mentally unstable and was eventually transferred to the same psychiatric hospital, the very same one, where Alistair and she had conspired to have me locked away. The symmetry was perfect. One afternoon about 6 months after the takeover, Leo came into my office. He had a strange look on his face, a mixture of satisfaction and pity. "This was taken by one of our due diligence guys on the ground," he said, handing me a photograph. In the picture, a man with a scruffy beard and wearing tattered, dirt-stained clothes was hauling bricks at a construction site. The sunlight turned his gaunt back into a skeletal silhouette. It was Alistair. He seemed to be scraping by, doing manual labor for cash. I stared at the photo for a long time, taking in every detail of his downfall. The dirt under his nails, the hopeless slump of his shoulders. Then without a word I fed it into the sleek shredder beside my desk. The machine whirred, chewing the image of my former tormentor into insignificant confetti. "Don't bring me any more news about him, Leo," I said calmly, turning back to the cityscape. "To me, he's an irrelevant stranger. There's no place for him in my world anymore." I rose and walked to the huge floor-to-ceiling window, looking down over the bustling city at my feet. My city. My empire. My new life had only just begun. I was no one's substitute, no one's appendage. I was Arya Moore, the sole queen of this business empire, forged in the fires of betrayal and crowned with the ashes of my enemies. But a throne built on vengeance can be a lonely one. The roaring inferno that had fueled me for over a year had burned down to embers, leaving behind a quiet, vast landscape. The meetings, the deals, the accolades, they were all part of the machinery of success, but they no longer held the sharp, addictive thrill of the hunt. I had achieved everything I had set out to do, and the silence that followed was deafening. It was in this quietude that a new restlessness began to stir. The fight was over. So what now? The idea came to me not in a boardroom but in the quiet of my new penthouse, surrounded by a luxury that felt increasingly hollow. Revenge had been a destination, a fixed point on a map. Now that I had arrived, the map was blank. I had spent so long defining myself against Alistair, that without him as my polar north, I felt untethered. I found myself thinking of Clara, the woman whose face I had shared, whose life had been stolen to fuel Isabella's ambition. I thought of the other people Alistair had crushed on his way to the top, the small business owners he had bankrupted, the employees he had callously discarded. I was now the one holding the power he had so grievously misused. One evening I summoned Leo and Charles Reed to my home. "We're starting a new foundation," I announced, pushing a prospectus across the glass table towards them. "The Phoenix Rise Foundation." Leo scanned the document, his eyebrows rising. "Legal aid for the wrongly accused? Funding for mental health advocacy? Small business grants for entrepreneurs screwed over by corporate giants? Arya, this is a massive philanthropic endeavor. It's not philanthropy, I corrected him, my voice firm. It's recalibration. Alistair's legacy was one of consumption and destruction. Mine won't be. I looked at Charles. And Phoenix Rising Entertainment will produce the content. Documentaries on corporate ethics. Stories about survivors, not just victims. We have the platform. We should use it for something other than just profit. This became my new purpose. The Phoenix Rise Foundation became my true empire, one built not on ruins but on rebuilding. We funded legal battles for those who couldn't afford them, providing a shield for the vulnerable that I had never had. We established a network of mental health clinics, ensuring no one would be as alone and helpless as I had been in that asylum. It was during the launch gala for the foundation that I saw him again. He was across the crowded ballroom talking animatedly with Charles. He wasn't my type, not polished and cold like Alistair. He had a warmth about him, an easy intelligence in his eyes. He was Dr. Julian Thorne, a renowned human rights lawyer and one of the first major advocates to partner with our foundation. He caught my eye and offered a small, genuine smile before returning to his conversation. There was no calculation in his gaze, no desire for my power or wealth. He saw a partner in a cause. Later he found me on the terrace, away from the noise. Your foundation is going to change a lot of lives, Miss Moore, he said, his voice quiet and steady. Aria, please, I replied. And it's just a start. We're working on the case for the former Vance Global factory workers, he said. The ones who lost their pensions. With the foundation's backing, we can actually get them justice. We talked for an hour, not about business or revenge, but about justice and hope. It was the first conversation in years that wasn't a move in a game. As he left, he said, "It's good to finally meet the woman behind the legend. The headlines don't do you justice." I watched him go, a strange, unfamiliar feeling stirring in my chest. It wasn't the violent hunger of revenge, or the cold satisfaction of victory. It was something quieter, more fragile. Something like the first green shoot breaking through scorched earth. I looked back at the glittering city, but for the first time I didn't see a conquered kingdom. I saw a community. The past was a ghost I had finally laid to rest. The future was no longer a battlefield to be won, but a horizon to be explored. The phoenix had risen from the ashes of revenge. Now it was time for her to fly. The end.